Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. The UK Parliament starting the clock this Tuesday on preparations for Britain sometime within the next 2 years to vote whether or not to stay in the European Union. In part one of our discussion, we were talking about the haggling that will go on in Parliament, in Brussels, between David Cameron and the other member states over conditions of for Britain staying in the European Union. We've been talking about it with Jeremy Stubbs, chair of the British Conservatives here in Paris. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to Yves Bertoncini, director of the Jacques Delors Institute, based here in Paris. Lucy Thomas, campaign director of Business for New Europe, is with us from London, and we welcome back as well. He's a member of the European Parliament from UKIP, Tim Acker. Tim, what's it like being a member of the European Parliament and coming from a party that's against the European Union? Is it a bit of a contradiction being in Strasbourg where you are, even though your party is against being there?
Well, we've never seen it as a permanent fixture, but it gives us a platform to tell the folks back home what exactly is going on here. Let's look at TTIP, where you've got all of the other British political parties lining up to support it, and only UKIP actually saying, well, hang on, guys, this would actually tear up the NHS. It would leave the British government open
That's
to being
the negotiations
by,
over a free trade
companies.
agreement with the United States.
Yeah. And there was meant to be a vote tomorrow. I'm hearing things that it's been pulled. But it's the case that we make back home that, hang on, the institutions here, they make our laws, they write our laws. It costs £55 million a day to belong to this institution, and the sooner we're out of it, the much better for the British people.
Lucy Thomas, has the European Union been good for business in Britain?
Oh, absolutely. I just wanted to sort of point out the irony of Tim's position, saying that, you know, he doesn't want this free trade deal with America. But previously he was saying we need to get out of the EU so we can forge our own trade with the rest of the world. Well, America being a prime candidate for that, so it's a bit strange. But and also,
well,
you know, being.
Go ahead,
Sorry?
Lucy Thomas.
Well, that's the point.
Yeah,
You've got.
You're also very happy to be a member of the European Parliament, turn up to, I think, 47% of the votes and take the salary and sort of tell people at home how it's all going on. I just find it a little bit ironic. Sorry, going back to the benefits to business of being in the EU, I mean, it's the economy as a whole and it's the country as a whole which has benefited. So we get access to the largest market in the world with 500 million consumers, and it's right on our doorstep. And despite what Tim was saying, we actually get to trade with the rest of the world as well. So we have these free trade deals with over 50 countries. And it's just really seamless and easy to export to all these countries with one set of rules. And there's free movement of goods and services. But also there are things like employment rights and lots of other benefits which have been sort of brought to Britain as a result of Europe.
All right. There's one man, of course, at the center of all this, and that is the Prime Minister himself. Now, many panelists on this show, you could say, underestimated David Cameron. They called him ineffectual, weak, and what happened? He won re-election, and he won it, you could say, in a resounding fashion, since now he's no longer in a coalition. However, Europe showing cracks in the facade when it comes to the new government. On Sunday, the Prime Minister warning his cabinet he wanted unity on the government's policy. However, he quickly backtracked with a backlash from his own camp, felt as far away as the Bavarian Alps, where the PM was taking part in the G7 summit. There, he insisted he wasn't reversing himself when he said, of course, that members of his cabinet can have their own opinion. Once they're on the campaign trail for the referendum itself, not, though, during the renegotiation with Brussels.
What I said is that if you want to be part of the government, you have to take the view that we're engaged in an exercise of renegotiation to have a referendum that will lead to a successful outcome. That is what I said. I feel that there was a misinterpretation, which is why I woke up and read the newspapers and thought, well, I will repeat what I said and make that very clear. But as for your question about the Conservative Party, no, I think there's real unity behind a renegotiate and referendum strategy, which is right for the country.
Real unity, Jeremy Stubbs, is that a bit of an overstretch? There are a lot of people, including within the cabinet, who would probably vote no to an EU referendum.
Well, in a democracy, unity doesn't mean unanimity, absolute unanimity. The Conservative government does speak for a larger section of the British population, which is certainly not the case for UKIP, as their performance in the recent parliamentary elections in Westminster showed. I think that we've got to allow a plurality of opinion. In many ways, those people who do not follow the party line on Europe are nevertheless speaking for their constituents, and we must allow that and we must respect it. And indeed, in many ways, the feeling against Europe has shown us that we have not been doing things right in Europe. And I think that that is a lesson that we've all got to learn across Europe. It's as equally true in France as in Britain. I don't think we should look for some sort of absolute unanimity. We're looking for a general feeling that this is the right way to go, and we're going to get it.
Now, a rising star of the Conservative Party is, of course, the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, in favour of staying in Europe only if Britain gets what it wants from Brussels. On paper, that's the same position as David Cameron. He adds, however, that if you're going to go into a difficult international negotiation of this kind, then you have to be prepared to walk away if you don't get the result that you want. And he adds, Jeremy Stubbs, Britain could forge an alternative future that could be just as glorious and just as prosperous with a free trade arrangement. Now, that sounds a little bit like what we just heard from Tim Acker.
Well, it sounds like he is hedging his bets, rather. I don't know what he means by this alternative free trade vision that he has. It may have some imperial nostalgia behind it. We will have a bit of nostalgia for the Empire days from time to time when there are parades, etc. But we've got to be realistic today, and I think we've already heard that the kinds of international trade agreements that are negotiated by large blocs like the EU, especially with the North American bloc, are the way things are going, and we've just got to follow it.
On this point, Lucy Thomas, when you look at the politics of it all, right now the polls indicate that if the referendum were held tomorrow, the UK would stay in the EU. But could we see brinkmanship on the part of politicians that could sway the result the other way?
Yes, I think, and as you point to, I mean, I think characters like Boris Johnson are crucial to what happens with the Conservative Party, because we must remember that the Prime Minister himself has said he will be stepping down sort of halfway through this Parliament. So once the referendum is out of the way, then all of these other leadership candidates, of which Boris Johnson will be one, will be jostling for position. So I think among those contenders, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, George Osborne, Sajid Javid, I think all of those will postpone as long as possible, saying what they would do until the reform process is complete, and then we will see the positions that they take. But I suspect that most of them will come in line behind the Prime Minister, depending on what the sort of piece of paper looks like. But I think most of them will swing behind him. But again, at this time, it's about that negotiation and how much hardball do you want to play. And the Conservative position has been to say we have to threaten to leave in order to get what we want. Now, I and our business members would say it's much better to be a bit more collegiate and look for common areas and common ground for reform. But that's sort of the negotiating position that the government has taken.
Bertoncini?
Yeah, I would say that we in France are experienced as regards the referendum in the EU, and it's a gambit because first people will answer.
What's the expression that if you stage a referendum, you're not sure the voters will answer the question you ask?
Of course not. You answer the person asking the question first. Then you answer according to the overall context, be it political, economic, international. And on this, you don't have much influence. And then finally, you answer on the text when there is a text. And on this point, which is not the major point, on this point, the issue will be, will the referendum be on the text, I mean, on the reforms obtained? The reforms obtained will be substantial, but that will be never enough for some backbenchers of the Tory party, and of course never enough for the UKIP members. Or, I mean, will this be on this, the referendum, or more generally on the membership of the UK, the membership? Of course, the referendum is not about you love it or you leave it. I mean, they don't love the EU that much, the Brits. It's not about that. It's, do you want to live or do you want to stay? If it's on this more general question, I think the yes could vote quite easily. But if it's on the text, on the scope of the reforms obtained, of course there will be reforms. There will be policy signals. And by the way, it's already underway. Better regulation, the TTIP negotiation, more digital market, more single markets, it's underway. But if it's only on the other, you know, let's say legal changement, legal adjustment, that may not be sufficient, and that could lead to a no, unfortunately.
We saw during the campaign that the Labour Party was against staging this referendum. Now they're in favor. Is that the sign, again, that there is this sort of tide towards consulting the citizens, which, again, could go either way?
Well, I think that, yes, the tide is an inevitable one. Many of us are in agreement about that there's been such an absence of consultation that it's time we really cleared the air. Now, I know it's a risk. There must be a risk that things will go wrong, but it's a risk worth taking for the whole of Europe. And I think here is where Britain, to follow on from some of the things that have been said, we cannot be just the complaining man or woman in Europe. We've got to show some leadership. This is the fundamental thing.
Now, at the beginning of the show, Yves Bertoncini mentioned a previous precedent, that 1975 referendum. But there's another precedent. And this one wasn't too kind to the sitting Prime Minister of Britain. And that was the so-called Maastricht Rebellion. It was in 1993. There was the Maastricht Treaty being voted on. And there was this vote in Parliament where the backbenchers basically upstaged the then Prime Minister, John Major, and it was a big political blow to him. Could David Cameron suffer a similar blow?
It's not inconceivable, but I don't think it's likely. He's not in the same situation. He has achieved a remarkable and, in some ways, unexpected victory. So his popularity is riding high. He's not the same sort of figure. He's more charismatic, really, than John Major was. And I think it's also worth saying that Britain wasn't as used to many of the, let's face it, benefits of the European Union as we are now. There was still a great deal of mistrust. I know some people would say that mistrust has come back. I don't think it is as deep-seated as it was then.
Tim Acker?
Well, John Major, during the Maastricht Rebellion, took that to be a confidence motion. He then said to the Conservative Party, well, I'm placing my faith in Maastricht as a confidence vote, and they all fell in line. Look, the Conservative Party have been singing a good song about the European Union for far too long, and the only reason we are having this referendum now is because of UKIP, because there is another choice on the ballot paper, one that has consistently said we would be much better off out. And if David Cameron dares try to fudge any sort of renegotiation and bring some tinkering here and there back to London and spin it as a mass renegotiation, that free movement's been sorted, that there's action on benefits and all of the green policies are going, and something that the British people would actually like to see, and it will turn out to be not that way. What David Cameron is really worried about is UKIP taking the lead on the opposition, the no campaign, and taking a lead like the SNP did after their referendum, because it was all in the last week, wasn't it? The leaders all signed the agreement saying, we'll get devolution for Scotland, we'll get a better deal, trust us, and vote to stay part of the Union, and look what happened. They got diddled out of their say. The same will happen again. The three party leaders will all line up as it looks that Britain will leave the European Union, all say the same. And I just think if they dare try and fool the British public now, we will be out of the European Union one way or another. The British public aren't fools. 4 million people voted for UKIP. UKIP won for the first time in over 100 years, a party that wasn't red or blue won a national election in the European elections. There is a people's army out there, and they want their country back. And anyone that tries to hoodwink us out of that decision and out of that choice, well, they'll reap the whirlwind of the ballot box.
Lucy Thomas, how far would you stretch the comparison between, again, that backbench revolt of 1993 and today?
Well, I think Jeremy was right that given the Prime Minister's surprise victory, so far people have been relatively united in the Conservative Party. So I think he'll manage to keep a lid on it until he comes back with that piece of paper. But it's then what happens after that that really will count. So will he be able to impose sort of collective responsibility? And we've seen in the last couple of days this sort of hokey-cokey with whether he meant during this reform period or during the referendum that ministers would have to toe the line. So I think that could be quite tricky for him. And there is a sizable chunk of the Conservative Party who would want to leave come what may. At the moment, there are 50 members of this group called Conservatives for Britain, but that then leaves, you know, at least 250 others all sort of in play, if you like. So it'll be interesting to see how many of those fall behind. I mean, and something Tim said, which I would absolutely agree with, is that it is a result of UKIP pressure that this referendum is happening. I mean, the Prime Minister didn't want to hold this in the beginning, and then in the end, in his Bloomberg speech in 2013, he sort of relented and said, actually, no, I'm going to put this to the people, partly as a move to try and win back some votes from UKIP, which didn't necessarily happen. So yeah, I would agree with Tim that it's their work and Nigel Farage banging on about the referendum that this is now happening.
On that score, I'm haunted by something Yves Bertoncini said a few minutes ago. He said, the British don't love Europe that much. And let me ask you, Lucy, let me ask you a personal question here. Is it a tough sell, getting up in the morning and selling a partnership with the European Union when you're in London?
Yes, and none of us would pretend that we love Europe and that it's perfect as it is. So I think that's a non-starter from the beginning. And similar to the Scottish debate in a way, I think, you know, the Best Together campaign didn't try to sell the United Kingdom as this big sort of emotional thing, which is the same as us. You know, I certainly wouldn't say the EU institutions are perfect. There are loads of things that Brussels does really badly, not least actually the Strasbourg Parliament in which Tim is currently standing. The fact that you've got this one Parliament in Brussels, one Parliament in Strasbourg, and they shuffle between the two. Those kind of things are inexcusable. They shouldn't exist. They're a waste of money and energy. But nevertheless, to then say that because of these real frustrations that we should chuck the whole baby out with the bathwater, get rid of all of these benefits of being part of this bloc, being safer in the world, you know, against threats from Russia and the Middle East, and this amazing free trade deal we have at the moment, you know, that's the thing that I think we have to focus on, and that just sort of reminding people of the benefits, because the other sort of good thing about having a referendum is that you have to have this argument. We have to put the case, and the onus actually is on us to explain the benefits so people believe them, and then they can have their say. You know, if it turns out that Tim's arguments are preferred by people, then we will leave. You know, that's what happens in a referendum. That's democracy. But I think, you know, I'm encouraged that, for me, I just think the benefits are so overwhelming that I hope other people will agree.
All right, but of course we've seen...
Can I come in there? Can I come in there?
Sure, Tim Acker.
For a minute, because there's one problem that's been going on across this whole debate. You've used Europe and the European Union interchangeably. They are different things. Europe is a set of countries. The European Union is a political construct. It is a political institution. They are not the same. And we're going to see a lot of this. We're going to see a lot of blurred lines. We're going to see the old trampled line about 3 million jobs. We're going to see lots of scare stories. You know, be straight with the people. The European Union is a political construct. Britain was able to trade with the world long before it, and it will be able to trade with the world long after it. It had its time, it's had its day, but I'm glad we're having this referendum now, and it will be a long road, and let's have the debates. You know, we're going to hit the ground running, we're going to have the public meetings, and I'd love to debate Lucy on the stump so we can talk to the public meetings and get the debate out into the country and put the issues there. I think it would be fantastic if we have a turnout like we had in Scotland with the Scottish referendum, where some polling stations were reporting 100% turnout. We've been waiting decades for this referendum. I'm glad we're having it, but let's make sure we've got our terms right.
All right, Jeremy Stubbs, on this, you're the Englishman in Paris here. When you look at, when you peruse the morning papers back in Britain, do you feel that disconnect? That sometimes in France we don't really understand why this Euroscepticism is so vociferous in a especially with London being the financial capital of Europe?
Yes, well, these are old reactions that have died hard. When things are going badly in Europe, France tends to say, oh, it's our former friends, the Germans, who are not playing the game anymore. And in Britain, our reaction is to say, oh, well, we shouldn't have got into this club in the first place. These are all things that are really backward-looking. And what we need to do is look forward. We've all got problems, that's the face of it. And I think we need to get beyond these old stereotypes. The idea that everybody in Britain is just dying to break away and sail across the Atlantic is utterly false and will be proven false in the referendum.
Yves Bertoncini?
I remember Margaret Thatcher at campaign in the 70s saying that Europe is our local continent. And she had said, well, we should join the EEC at that time because it's our local continent. It means that, of course, we have a global vision, global interest, but our continent is Europe. And the political form taken by the Union of the European nation states is the European Union. And then I feel it's not contradictory to fight for national interest and to be part of the European Union. And I believe that the Brits are a very important people, very impressive people, but it's less than 1% of the world population. If you look at the world from Beijing or from Washington, if you hear Barack Obama, I mean, for them, it's all clear that in the world to come, not the world of yesterday, the world to come, we are stronger together. And of course, the UK is part of this common story.
All right, and of course, as Tim Acker was saying, we will continue to debate this over the years, next 2 years to come, or if not sooner. Tim Acker, thank you for being with us from Strasbourg. Lucy Thomas, thank you for being with us from London. Jeremy Stubbs and Yves Bertoncini. Stay with us, gentlemen and ladies, because our Media Watch segment is next. And we are joined by James Creedon. How are you, sir?
Very well, thank you, Francois. So obviously a lot of reaction online media and social media to the debate today in the House of Commons. Also to the fact that the ratings agency Moody's said the possibility of losing access to the EU's single market is a threat to the EU to the UK's economic prospects. So there were quite a lot of people reacting to that online, and there was quite a few headlines related to that. Also to the news that HSBC is to cut 8,000 UK jobs as it takes the axe to European operations. So some people making comments on social media in reference to a potential Brexit, rather. Oh, look, it's nothing to do with the EU referendum. So I think already the economic fallout of a potential exit is being discussed, whether it be by rating agencies or people online reacting to economic decisions such as that one.
Not sure the two are related,
right?
But it is interesting because it's the question of regional interests and global interests.
That's right, and certainly the two are being conflated on social media, and people are drawing those links, whether they're real or false. Another hashtag being that you can see very much in favour of Britain exiting is no to EU. We don't want a dictatorship, we want democracy. Interesting to see what kind of people are using that hashtag, or what kind of accounts, such as Marine Le Pen for 2017 president, for example. So there seems to be an alignment of interests there, with graphics such as this one being uploaded. The EU locks us out of world trade agreements and dictates governments say no. So there you go. That is perhaps indicative of the kind of people who are supporting Brexit. Not all people, of course, are extremely nationalist in that sense, but also quotes from Philip Hammond, who in his speech to Parliament today, a lot of websites and social media picking up on that. Treaties from Maastricht to Lisbon have transferred new powers to the EU, which has eroded EU's democratic legitimacy, so in favour of a renegotiation. And indeed,
I have a question on that point. What signal, Jeremy Stubbs, does it send, the fact that Hammond, who himself is more on the Eurosceptic camp inside of David Cameron's cabinet, that he was the one standing up in Parliament?
Well, dare I say it, possibly a negotiation tactic. You've got to have your good cops and your bad cops and let them all speak at the right moment to get the right result. We'll see if it works.
And what's interesting is that the Open Europe, which is a pro-EU think tank, which is publishing all of these tweets that quote Hammond this afternoon, they have just today, published an 11-point strategy for, as the headline says there, renegotiation strategy, which would focus on an alternative or even closer union. And what they suggest is a twin speed approach, which is just reflecting the reality already of a Europe that is functioning on multiple different levels. And so even pro-EU think tanks are perhaps suggesting that a renegotiation of some sorts is the way forward. Just a minor detail, several parties as well also arguing for 16 and 17-year-olds to be able to vote in a potential referendum. You've got the Green Party and also Alex Salmond of the Scottish National Party saying that this would be a good idea, or even deeply insulting if it isn't brought in. So perhaps a side debate to the central debate.
Interesting one, yeah, because they did vote in the Scottish referendum.
That's right, and whether or not they would be more pro-EU or less pro-EU, I suppose it depends. A difficult one to call.
All right, many thanks for that, James Creed. And I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.